Story number 1. The Death Road. I've always been drawn to the open road, the promise of endless horizons and the freedom that comes with driving through the vast, untamed wilderness. So when my friends Jake, Emily, Sarah, and Mike decided to embark on a road trip along the infamous Alaska Highway, I didn't hesitate to join them. We were a tight-knit group, united by our love for adventure and the thrill of exploring the unknown. The Alaska Highway, or the Alcan Highway as it's officially known, stretches over 1.700 miles from Dawson Creek in British Columbia to Delta Junction in Alaska. It's a route that winds through some of the most remote and unforgiving landscapes on the planet, earning its reputation for being both beautiful and treacherous. We were well aware of the stories, tales of mysterious disappearances, eerie sightings, and inexplicable phenomena that plagued travelers who dared to traverse its length at night. But skepticism ran deep in our group, and we dismissed these as mere folklore meant to scare off the unwary. Our journey began smoothly enough. The first few days were filled with laughter, stunning views of snow-capped mountains, and the camaraderie that only a shared adventure can bring. We camped under the stars, the northern lights painting the sky in vibrant hues of green and purple, and the silence of the wilderness a stark contrast to the noise of our everyday lives. It was on the fourth night that things started to take a sinister turn. We were driving through a particularly dense stretch of forest, the road barely visible beneath the thick blanket of snow. The temperature had plummeted, and the wind howled like a living entity, whipping snowflakes into a frenzy. The darkness was absolute, the only light emanating from our headlights as we cautiously navigated the treacherous terrain. Suddenly, our car began to sputter and lose power. Jake, our mechanic and the most experienced driver among us, pulled over to the side of the road. We all piled out into the biting cold, the howling wind making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet in front of us. "What's wrong with the engine?" Emily asked, shivering as she wrapped her arms around herself. Jake popped the hood, his face pale as he examined the engine. "It's not responding. I can't figure out what's causing it." Sarah stepped back, scanning the surrounding forest with unease. "Maybe we should stay in the car and wait for morning. It's too dangerous to be out here at night." But curiosity got the better of us. As hours passed with no sign of help, we decided to attempt a temporary fix, hoping to get the car running again. Jake worked tirelessly, sweat mixing with the frost on his brow, while the rest of us tried to keep warm by the dwindling fire. That's when we saw it. A solitary figure standing at the edge of the road, barely visible through the thick fog. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his coat flapping violently in the wind. His presence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the serene yet brutal beauty of the Alaskan wilderness. "Hello," Jake called out, his voice wavering slightly. "Do you need help?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he stood motionless, his eyes fixed on us with an intensity that sent chills down our spines. There was something almost otherworldly about him, an aura of sorrow and desperation that made us uneasy. "Maybe he's lost," I suggested, trying to rationalize the situation. "Let's go see if he needs assistance." Against Sarah's protests, Jake nodded and approached the man cautiously. As we drew nearer, the man remained still, his expression blank. Just as Jake reached out to offer a hand, the figure dissolved into the mist, vanishing without a trace. We stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The temperature seemed to drop further, the wind intensifying as if reacting to the disappearance of the stranger. "Let's get back to the car," Jake said firmly, grabbing his tools. "We need to try again." But as we turned to leave, we realized something horrifying. We were no longer alone. Emerging from the shadows were dozens of figures, their forms indistinct and shrouded in the same fog that had concealed the first man. They moved silently, circling the car with unwavering, predatory gazes. "Run," Jake whispered urgently, his eyes wide with fear. We sprinted back to the car, our hearts pounding in our chests. The figures followed, their presence oppressive and relentless. As we fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine, the air grew thick with tension, the silence broken only by the sound of our racing breaths and the distant howling of the wind. Finally, the car roared to life, and we sped down the road, desperate to escape the eerie procession that now surrounded us. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the figures were there, dozens of them, their eyes burning with an unspoken hunger, watching our every move. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, the landscape a blur of snow and darkness. Our attempts to outpace the apparitions were futile, no matter how fast we drove. The figures remained steadfast, their numbers seemingly multiplying with each passing mile. Suddenly, one of my friends, Emily, was gone. One moment she was sitting in the passenger seat, and the next, she had vanished, leaving no trace but a faint outline in the snow where her footprints had led into the void. "Emily!" I screamed, terror gripping me as I realized the gravity of our situation. The remaining three of us fought to keep the car moving. But it was too late. The figures had surrounded us completely, their silent presence suffocating. In a final, desperate attempt to survive, we made a last stand, bolting out of the car to fend off the shadows. But it was no use. The figures moved with unnatural speed and agility, enveloping us in darkness and silence. One by one, we were consumed, our screams lost to the howling wind and the unforgiving night. When morning finally broke, the snow-covered road was eerily silent. The car sat abandoned, its engine cold and lifeless, surrounded by only a few large footprints leading into the emptiness. There was no sign of the group, no trace of the harrowing events that had unfolded in the dead of night. The Alaska Highway remains a beacon for adventurers and thrill-seekers, but our story serves as a cautionary tale for those who dare to traverse its lonely stretches after dark. The Death Road, as it came to be known, holds secrets that defy explanation, haunting the memories of those who have vanished without a trace. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through the trees and the northern lights shimmer ominously in the sky, I wonder about my friends and the fate that befell us on that cursed road. Are we still wandering in the shadows, trapped in an eternal loop of fear and despair? Or have we become part of the legends that warn others to steer clear of the death road's malevolent embrace? If you ever find yourself driving along the Alaska Highway under the cover of night, heed this warning. Respect the power of the wilderness. Honor the stories of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the darkness, there are forces that hunger for more than just sustenance. They hunger for your very soul. Story number 2. The Last Inn. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in the bustling city of Chicago, I was always more inclined toward science and logic than superstition and folklore. But that changed the winter my boyfriend, Mark, and I decided to escape the relentless cold and chaos of urban life for a weekend retreat in the remote mountains of Alaska. We found the perfect getaway, a quaint cabin nestled on the edge of an expansive forest, promising solitude and tranquility. The cabin, aptly named Whispering Pines Inn, was run by an elderly couple, Martha and Henry. They greeted us warmly, their faces weathered by years of living in the harsh Alaskan wilderness. Martha handed us the keys with a stern yet kind warning. "You folks stay away from the basement," she advised, her voice gravelly from years of shouting over the roar of storms. "It's best left untouched." Mark and I exchanged amused glances. "Why, it's just a basement," I chuckled, trying to mask my amusement. Martha's eyes hardened slightly. "Some doors are better left closed. Trust me." We nodded, dismissing her warning as the ramblings of an old woman accustomed to solitude. The first day passed peacefully. We explored the surrounding forest, hiked up to breathtaking vistas, and enjoyed the warmth of the roaring fireplace inside the cabin. As night fell, we settled into our cozy sleeping bags, lulled by the sounds of the wilderness outside. But sleep was elusive. The wind howled like a living creature, rattling the windows and sending eerie shadows dancing across the walls. Around midnight, Mark woke me, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" I strained to listen, but the only sound was the relentless storm outside. "Hear what?" "A scratching noise, like someone clawing at the door," he whispered, fear evident in his eyes. I reassured him, though my own heart pounded in my chest. "Probably just the wind or a tree branch." Mark nodded, but the unease lingered. We tried to go back to sleep, but the sounds persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Finally, curiosity got the better of us. "We need to check it out," Mark said, his voice steady but tense. I hesitated, recalling Martha's warning, but the fear of the unknown pushed me forward. We grabbed our flashlights and made our way toward the basement door, which stood ominously at the back of the cabin. The door was old, its wood darkened by years of neglect. Mark reached for the handle, and with a deep breath, we pushed it open. A musty, damp smell wafted out, mingling with the scent of pine and smoke. The basement was dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and forgotten memories. As we stepped inside, our flashlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls, my breath visible in the cold air. I scanned the room. That's when I saw them. Dry blood stains smeared across the wooden floor and walls, accompanied by deep scratches that marred the surface. My stomach churned as I took in the grotesque sight. "Mark, what is all this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He knelt down, examining the stains. "I have no idea. Maybe someone else stayed here before us." A sudden chill ran down my spine. "We need to leave. Now." But as we turned to exit, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we struggled to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped further, our breaths turning to frost in the air. Then, from the far corner of the basement, a faint sound emerged, a soft, sorrowful crying that echoed through the room. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a haunting melody of despair that seemed to seep into my very soul. "Did you hear that?" Mark whispered, his eyes wide with fear. I nodded, unable to tear my gaze away from the shadows. "We need to find another way out." As we fumbled through the darkness, trying to locate a window or another exit, the crying grew louder, more desperate. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the basement, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into pitch-black darkness. The sound of scratching returned, this time louder and more frantic, as if something was desperately trying to claw its way out. "Mark, stay close," I urged, grabbing his arm. "We can't let it separate us." But the basement felt endless, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers that disoriented us. Every step we took seemed to lead us deeper into the heart of the nightmare. Then, out of nowhere, a figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, gaunt man dressed in tattered clothing, his eyes glowing a fierce, unnatural red. His presence was oppressive, his every movement slow and deliberate. "Leave now," he growled, his voice a guttural rasp that reverberated through the basement. "You don't belong here." We froze, terror rooting us to the spot. The man's hollow eyes bore into ours, his expression twisted with anguish and malice. "Don't open the wrong doors," he whispered, his voice echoing off the walls. Mark and I exchanged a terrified glance, realizing that we were dealing with something beyond our understanding. The man began to move toward us, his steps deliberate and menacing, desperate to escape. We turned and sprinted back toward the basement door, but it remained firmly shut, mocking our attempts to flee. The crying and scratching intensified, surrounding us from all sides, a cacophony of sorrow and rage that threatened to overwhelm our senses. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a solution to this waking nightmare. But the basement offered no mercy, trapping us in its icy grip. Just when hope seemed lost, a loud crash echoed through the room. A shelf toppled over, momentarily distracting the figure. Seizing the opportunity, We pushed against the door with all our might, and to our astonishment, it swung open, allowing us to escape back into the warmth of the cabin. Breathing heavily, we slammed the door shut and bolted it, the sounds of the basement fading behind us. We stood there, trembling, our hearts pounding in our chests, trying to make sense of what had just transpired. "We need to leave," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. "We can't stay here." But as we packed our belongings in haste, the cabin seemed to transform around us. The walls grew colder, the air thicker, and the shadows longer. The windows showed nothing but darkness, and the storm outside had intensified, the wind howling like a living thing. It was as if the cabin itself was trying to keep us trapped, refusing to let us escape the horrors of the basement. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to abate, the snow settling into a serene blanket. Exhausted and emotionally drained, we decided to leave, desperate to put the terrifying night behind us. But as we stepped outside, the landscape had changed. The forest around us was unfamiliar, the path we had taken now obscured by fresh snowfall. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, the cabin no longer standing as a beacon of refuge. In our desperation, we followed the footprints we had left behind, hoping they would lead us back to civilization. But the snow-covered ground revealed only one set of large, unnaturally deep footprints circling around us, disappearing into the void. The same marks had appeared overnight, a sinister reminder that something had claimed the cabin and its secrets. As night fell once more, the haunting cries returned, echoing through the forest. We ran, our breaths visible in the cold air, the shadowy figure from the basement seemingly tracking our every move. The darkness closed in around us, the whispers growing louder, urging us to turn back, to leave the wilderness and never return. But escape was futile. Every path led us deeper into the unknown, the forest a labyrinth of fear and despair. And just when hope seemed lost, the first light of dawn broke through the trees, guiding us back to familiar territory. Exhausted and broken, we stumbled into the nearest town, the horrors of the past night still vivid in our minds. We reported the abandoned cabin and the strange occurrences to the local authorities, but they dismissed our claims as the ravings of frightened travelers. Pine Ridge was a place of rugged beauty and isolation, where the wildness of nature often overshadowed the whispers of its dark past. But Mark and I knew the truth. We had encountered something malevolent, something that thrived on fear and desperation. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, but the memory of that night remains etched in my mind. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the snow begins to fall, I hear the faint echoes of crying and scratching, a chilling reminder of the night we faced the horrors of the last inn. And I can't help but wonder how many others have fallen victim to the same darkness, lost in the unforgiving embrace of the Alaskan wilderness. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote corners of Alaska, heed this warning. Respect the warnings of those who came before. Honor the spirits of the lost, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the frozen wilderness, there are shadows that watch, whispers that lure, and horrors that hunger for more than just sustenance. They hunger for your very soul. Story number 3. Frozen Whispers. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, practicality and skepticism were virtues instilled in me from a young age. But that changed the winter my wife, Emily, and I decided to embark on an Alaskan expedition, a journey that would push the boundaries of our endurance and challenge everything we thought we knew about the world. It was early January when we arrived in Fairbanks, the gateway to the vast, icy wilderness of Alaska. The air was crisp, biting even through our layers of thermal gear. Our plan was simple: traverse the Glacier Trail, a remote path known for its breathtaking beauty and treacherous conditions. We were seasoned hikers, experienced in navigating the harshest terrains, but nothing could have prepared us for what lay ahead. After days of trekking through snow-covered forests and scaling icy ridges, we found ourselves lost. A sudden snowstorm had disoriented us, erasing landmarks and burying trails beneath relentless snowfall. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and desperation set in. It was then that we stumbled upon the abandoned hut, a solitary structure nestled between towering pines, its wooden frame battered by countless storms. "Maybe we can take shelter here," Emily suggested, her voice trembling with cold and fear. I nodded, relief washing over me. The hut looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it offered a semblance of safety from the raging storm outside. We pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, immediately struck by the oppressive silence. The interior was sparse, with a stone fireplace at the center and a few old wooden chairs scattered around. Emily began to gather dry wood, and I inspected the place for anything useful. As we prepared to light a fire, my eyes caught something unusual on the far wall. Strange drawings etched into the wood, symbols and images of a large, menacing creature with eyes devoid of pupils stared back at us. The drawings were crude, almost primitive, but the feeling they evoked was anything but childish. "Do you see this?" I asked, pointing to the drawings. Emily approached, her breath visible in the frigid air. "It's creepy. What do you think it means?" I shrugged, trying to rationalize the situation. "Probably just some old markings left by previous occupants. Maybe a way to scare off animals or something." We managed to get a fire going, the warmth providing much-needed comfort against the biting cold. As we sat huddled together, the storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a living beast. The crackling of the fire was the only sound, until late into the night when we began to hear it, a soft scratching noise coming from the roof. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, clutching my hand. I strained to listen, the noise repeating itself, a rhythmic tapping that sent shivers down my spine. "Probably just the wind," I replied, though doubt gnawed at me. But it wasn't the wind. The scratching grew louder, more deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to get in. Fear took hold, and we exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. The scratching ceased abruptly, replaced by faint whispers that seemed to seep through the walls. "Go out, go out." The words were barely audible, but their meaning was clear. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood up, grabbing my flashlight. "I'm going to check it out," I said, though my voice wavered. Emily grabbed her coat, her eyes wide with fear. "Be careful," she urged. I moved cautiously toward the back of the hut, the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The roof was old, the shingles loose from years of neglect. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Don't stay, leave now." I peered up, trying to locate the source of the sound. The storm outside raged on, the wind whipping around us with ferocity. Then, amidst the chaos, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing on the roof, its form indistinct against the swirling snow. It was tall and imposing, with an aura of malevolence that made my blood run cold. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it began to move toward me, each step deliberate and unnerving. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. I fumbled to pick it up, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "Go away," I shouted, desperation overtaking reason. The figure stopped, its hollow eyes fixed on me. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the howling wind. Then, without warning, it vanished, as if swallowed by the storm itself. I stood there, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. I hurried back to Emily, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. "We need to leave," I insisted, pulling her toward the door. But as we reached for the entrance, we realized with horror that the door was gone. In its place was a solid wall of ice, glistening under the weak light of our lantern. The scratching and whispering had returned, louder and more urgent. "Go out, leave now," the voices echoed around us. a haunting refrain that filled the hut with dread. "We're trapped," Emily said, her voice breaking. "What do we do?" I frantically searched the room for another way out. But every door and window had been sealed by the ice. The temperature inside the hut plummeted further, frost forming on the walls and our breaths turning to mist. The oppressive atmosphere pressed down on us, making it hard to breathe. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, converging into a single, commanding voice. "Join us." I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, to escape the nightmare that had engulfed us. But my body wouldn't respond. Frozen by fear, Emily grabbed my arm, her eyes pleading. "Please, Tom, help us." Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed a nearby chair and smashed it against the wall, shattering the ice that blocked our way. The sound was deafening, but it seemed to do nothing. The whispers turned to screams, and the figure from the roof reappeared, its presence more menacing than ever. It lunged at us, and I felt an invisible force pulling me toward it, dragging me into the icy darkness. I struggled, but it was futile. The last thing I saw was Emily's terrified face before everything went black. When I awoke, it was morning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a serene, snow-covered landscape. I was alone, the hut gone without a trace, save for the footprints leading away from where it had stood. They were large, deep impressions that disappeared into the vast expanse of snow, vanishing without a destination. Desperately, I searched the area, calling out for Emily, but there was no response. My heart sank as I realized she was gone, taken by whatever malevolent force had haunted that night. Days turned into weeks as I tried to find her, following the mysterious footprints that led nowhere. The local authorities dismissed my claims as a victim of the storm and the isolation. But I knew the truth. The creature with the pupilless eyes had claimed another soul, and I was left to bear the weight of our shared nightmare. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right and the northern lights dance across the sky, I hear her voice, a faint whisper carried on the breeze. "Go out! Leave now!" I live now in constant fear, haunted by the memory of that night and the lingering presence of the creature. Pine Ridge remains a place of stark beauty, but beneath its serene exterior lies a darkness that waits for unsuspecting souls to fall into its icy grip. If you ever find yourself lost in the Alaskan wilderness, heed this warning. Beware the abandoned huts, respect the warnings of the storm, and never ignore the whispers in the night. For in the heart of the frozen expanse, there are forces beyond our understanding, forces that hunger for more than just sustenance, but for the very essence of our souls. Story number 4. The Hungry One in the Night. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. Growing up in the small, tight-knit community of Pine Ridge, Alaska, practicality and skepticism were virtues instilled in us from a young age. But that winter changed everything for my family and me, forcing me to confront fears I never knew I had. It was mid-December when the storm hit. A relentless blizzard rolled in from the north, blanketing our remote mountain home in layers of snow. My parents, Sarah and David, decided it was best to stay put rather than risk the treacherous roads. Our wooden house, sturdy yet aging, stood alone against the unforgiving wilderness. Inside, the warmth from the fireplace and the flickering lights provided a semblance of comfort amidst the howling wind and icy gusts. My younger sister, Emily, was excited about the snow, building snowmen and crafting intricate ice sculptures by the window. Meanwhile, I busied myself with reading and helping my parents with chores, dismissing the storm as a minor inconvenience. Little did I know, it was the beginning of a nightmarish ordeal. One particularly cold night, as the wind roared outside and the snow piled higher against our doors, we heard it, a persistent knocking sound echoing through the house. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks, banging against the wooden shutters and rattling the windows. But the knocking grew louder, more deliberate, coming from the front door. David exchanged worried glances with Sarah. "Stay inside," he instructed firmly, moving to secure the windows. But the knocking continued, relentless and insistent, as if someone or something was trying to gain entry. I stood by the doorway, curiosity battling with fear. Maybe it's a neighbor who got stuck, I suggested, trying to rationalize the situation. Sarah shook her head, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the windows. No one else is out there. This is a remote area. We're miles from the nearest town. Emily clung to her blanket, her excitement replaced by anxiety. Maybe it's lost, she whispered, her voice trembling. David took a deep breath and approached the door cautiously, flashlight in hand. I'll see what it is, he said, opening the door a crack. The blinding light of the storm met his eyes, but there was no one there, just swirling snow and the howling wind. He closed the door, frustration etched on his face. There's nobody. It must be the storm. But the knocking didn't stop. Instead, it intensified, now coming from all around the house, as if multiple entities were trying to break in simultaneously. The temperature inside plummeted, our breaths visible in the icy air. We huddled together in the living room, the fear palpable. Around midnight, the knocking ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. The house seemed to hold its breath. The storm outside momentarily subdued. We tried to sleep, but the unease lingered, gnawing at our nerves. Just before dawn, the silence was shattered by a low, guttural growl emanating from the back of the house. It was unlike any animal sound I'd ever heard, harsh, menacing, filled with an otherworldly rage. I froze, listening as the growl repeated, getting closer with each pass. Stay together, David ordered, grabbing a lantern. He moved towards the source of the noise, Emily and Sarah following reluctantly. I stayed behind, my heart pounding in my chest, too terrified to join them. The growling led us to the back door, where the wind whipped violently, making it nearly impossible to see. David pushed the door open, the lantern casting long shadows into the darkness. There, illuminated by the flickering light, stood a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall and gaunt, its skin stretched tightly over bones that seemed too prominent. Its eyes glowed a fierce, unnatural red, piercing through the darkness with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Sharp, jagged teeth protruded from its mouth, and its movements were jerky, almost erratic, as it lurked near the edge of our property. "Who are you?" David demanded, his voice shaking despite his attempt at firmness. The creature didn't respond with words. Instead, it let out another guttural growl, this one closer, more threatening. Emily screamed and tried to run back inside, but the creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, its claws scraping against the wooden door. David slammed the door shut, barricading it as best he could. "We need to call for help," he said, his voice barely concealing his fear. But our phones had no signal. Pine Ridge was too remote, and the storm had knocked out all communication lines. We were utterly alone, trapped in our home with this nightmarish entity. The creature paced back and forth outside, its presence a constant reminder of the danger we faced. Each night, the sounds grew louder, the growls more intense, and the creature seemed to grow bolder, almost taunting us with its relentless pursuit. One night, as the storm raged on, the growling reached a fever pitch. The house shook with the force of the wind, and the creature began to pound on the doors and windows, trying to force its way inside. We huddled together, terrified, praying for dawn to break and the nightmare to end. But dawn never came. The days blended into nights, and the creature's torment continued unabated. Our supplies dwindled, and the isolation took its toll on our sanity. Emily grew more withdrawn, whispering about shadows and voices that weren't there. Sarah became frantic, trying to reinforce the barricades, while David remained stoic, his face a mask of determination and fear. One night, during the height of the storm, we heard it, a piercing scream that echoed through the house, followed by the sound of something or someone being dragged across the floor. We rushed to the source, the kitchen, where we found Emily gone. Panic ensued as we searched every room, every hiding spot, but she was nowhere to be found. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she sobbed uncontrollably. "He took her," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's taking us all." Desperation set in. We realized that the creature wasn't just a predator. It was a harbinger of something far more sinister. It wasn't merely seeking food. It was claiming souls, drawing us into its nightmarish existence. Days turned into weeks, and one by one, the creature hunted us down. Lisa was the next to disappear, followed by Tom, each abduction marked by the same charred footprints that led in circles around the house. The remaining members of our family, Sarah and me, were left to face the creature alone, our hope dwindling with each passing day. One cold, bleak night, with only the remnants of our strength left, I confronted the creature. The house was eerily silent, the storm outside a mere whisper compared to the storm within me. I stood at the front door, the lantern flickering weakly in my hand, facing the grotesque entity that had consumed our lives. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice quivering. "What do you want from us?" The creature tilted its head, eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through my very soul. For a moment, I saw something: pain, hunger, a sorrow that mirrored my own despair. It wasn't just a mindless predator. It was something more, something that had lost its way. As the storm raged on, I made a decision. I couldn't let this nightmare continue. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lunged at the creature, trying to fend it off with the lantern. But it was too strong, its claws piercing through my defenses, pulling me towards the darkness outside. In those final moments, as the house shook and the storm reached its zenith, I realized that some forces are beyond our understanding. Entities born from the very essence of fear and hunger. Pine Ridge had its secrets, and now I was part of them, trapped forever in the icy grip of the Alaskan wilderness. To this day, the Grand Oak Theater remains a symbol of our town's resilience, its stories passed down with a mix of reverence and fear. Pine Ridge stands as a testament to the enduring human spirit, but the memory of that winter lingers like a shadow, a reminder of the night when darkness took hold and a family was torn apart by forces they couldn't comprehend. If you ever find yourself in the remote corners of Alaska, where the wind whispers through the pines and the snow blankets the earth in silence, heed this warning: respect the wilderness, honor the spirits of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the storm, amidst the howling winds and relentless cold, there lie secrets best left undiscovered, and entities that hunger for more than just sustenance. They hunger for your very soul. Story number 5. Malevolent Light. I've always been fascinated by the northern lights. As a child growing up in the Midwest, I'd spend hours staring at pictures of the aurora borealis, dreaming of the day I'd witness their ethereal dance in person. When my friends Jake, Emily, Sarah, and Matt proposed a trip to Alaska to chase the lights, couldn't resist. It was the perfect adventure: breathtaking scenery, clear skies, and the promise of witnessing one of nature's most spectacular phenomena. We arrived in Anchorage on a crisp October morning, the air sharp with the scent of pine and the distant howl of wolves. After a day of adjusting to the altitude and exploring the rugged beauty of the Alaskan wilderness, we set up camp near Fairbanks, our chosen vantage point for the aurora hunt. The nights were long and dark, the skies clear enough to offer an unobstructed view of the heavens. The first few nights were everything we'd hoped for. The northern lights painted the sky in vibrant greens and purples, swirling and shimmering like celestial brushstrokes. We sat around the campfire, bundled in layers of fleece and down, marveling at the spectacle above us. Conversations flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional exclamation of awe. But it was on the fourth night that everything changed. The evening had settled in with an unsettling stillness. A thick fog had rolled in, blanketing the forest in a ghostly haze. We huddled around the fire, the flames struggling against the damp air. The sky was a deep indigo, the usual flicker of the aurora barely visible through the mist. Jake was the first to notice the shift. "Guys, look up," he whispered, pointing toward the sky. First, we saw nothing unusual. The aurora was faint, its colors muted by the fog. But then, without warning, the lights began to change. The familiar greens and purples twisted into a fierce, blood-red hue, spreading rapidly across the heavens. "What the hell?" Emily exclaimed, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The red lights intensified, casting an eerie glow over the entire landscape. The forest around us was bathed in an unnatural crimson light, the trees appearing as dark, sinister silhouettes against the vivid backdrop. The air grew colder, and a palpable tension settled over our group. "Something's wrong," Matt said, his voice trembling. "This isn't natural." As the red aurora reached its peak, a figure materialized within the light. At first, it was just a shadowy outline, indistinct and merging with the swirling colors. But as moments passed, the shape became more defined, a tall, humanoid figure clad in what looked like tattered robes, its face obscured by darkness. "Did you see that?" Sarah asked, clutching her blanket tightly. Jake nodded, his expression grim. "Yeah, we need to get out of here." We sprang to our feet, packing up our gear hastily. The figure remained, its presence oppressive and menacing. The red lights continued to pulsate, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to reach out toward us. Panic set in as we realized that no matter how fast we moved, the figure was always there, a relentless sentinel in the crimson sky. "Let's run," I urged, grabbing my backpack and leading the way toward the trailhead. The path was barely visible in the thick fog, each step forward feeling heavier than the last. The forest around us seemed alive, the trees whispering secrets in a language we couldn't understand. As we ran, the figure began to follow, its movements slow but unwavering. Every time I glanced back, it was closer, the distance between us shrinking despite our desperate efforts to escape. The red aurora flickered violently, casting a hellish light that made everything appear distorted and nightmarish. Emily tripped on a hidden root, falling to the ground with a sharp cry. I reached down to help her up, but before I could touch her, a flash of brilliant red light enveloped her. She screamed, a sound that was quickly silenced as she vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a charred mark on the snow where she had fallen. "T-Tom." "No," Jake stammered, his face pale as he stared at where Emily had disappeared. "What just happened?" My heart raced, fear gripping every fiber of my being. "We have to keep moving," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stop now." But the night had other plans. As we continued our frantic escape, the ground beneath us began to tremble. Cracks formed in the snow, leading to deep crevasses that opened up without warning. The red aurora seemed to feed off the chaos, its light growing even more intense, swallowing the darkness around us. Suddenly, the sky tore open with a deafening roar, and beams of crimson light shot down like tendrils, lashing out at us with malevolent intent. The figure, now towering above us, let out a guttural growl that reverberated through the forest, shaking the very foundations of the earth. "No!" Sarah screamed, trying to pull Matt away from the edge of a newly formed crevasse. But it was too late. Matt slipped, his body plunging into the darkness below as the figure watched impassively. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the gravity of our situation. We were being hunted, pursued by an entity born from the very lights we had come to admire. The forest around us transformed into a labyrinth of terror, the trees bending and twisting into grotesque shapes, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. As the night dragged on, the remaining three of us struggled to find any semblance of safety. The red aurora continued its relentless assault, the light now casting everything in a hellish glow that made it impossible to discern friend from foe. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every rustle in the underbrush a harbinger of doom. In a final, desperate attempt to escape, we stumbled upon a clearing where the fog was thinner, the path back to civilization seemingly within reach. But as we approached, the ground beneath us gave way, and we found ourselves suspended over an abyss of swirling crimson light. The figure loomed above, his presence overwhelming, a reminder that some forces of nature are beyond human understanding. "Don't look back," pleaded, gripping the edge of the clearing. "We have to keep moving forward." But it was too late. The figure extended a hand, its touch icy cold, and the red light pulled at us with insidious intent. I felt myself being dragged backward, the pull irresistible, as if the very essence of the aurora sought to claim us as part of its eternal dance. In a final act of defiance, I tore my gaze away, focusing on the path ahead. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed forward, breaking free from the figure's grasp. I stumbled into the safety of the forest, the red aurora fading behind me as the first light of dawn broke through the horizon. Gasping for breath, I looked back to see the footprints we had left behind leading into the void, disappearing without a trace. The friends I had lost were gone, swallowed by the malevolent light that had once captivated us. We returned home with scars both physical and psychological, the memories of that night etched into our minds forever. I lost friends that night, and the guilt of their disappearance haunts me to this day. The northern lights still dance in the Alaskan skies, but I know better than to admire their beauty from afar. Some lights are meant to stay hidden, their secrets guarded by forces beyond our comprehension. If you ever find yourself under the northern sky, chasing the aurora borealis, remember our story, respect the wilderness, honor the spirits of those who came before, and tread carefully, for in the heart of the storm, amidst the swirling lights, there lies a darkness that waits to consume the unwary, turning dreams of beauty into nightmares of despair.